So hello Achievers, today I am with a new awesome guest. He's one of the world champion of public speaking. He's Tate. He's a former executive in the computer industry and he sold 500 millions in computer sales. He's with me to answer my questions. And hello Head,
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show, David. I appreciate it.
how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a beautiful day here in Denver, Colorado. There's not a cloud in the sky, and tomorrow is the 4th of July. It's the anniversary of our country.
It's amazing because my first time in the USA it was in Denver. I was 17 years old and I decided at this moment to come back in the USA, and I did it the last month, 7 years after.
Yeah,
It's great.
your initial goal. Good,
It's
good.
great. Before to ask you a lot of questions about public speaking and how you captivate your audience, I would love to know who are you and where do you come from, and especially your struggles and how did you overcome your struggles?
No, that's a great question. One of the struggles I overcame in my life early on is stuttering. I'm a stutterer, and there's no cure for stuttering. And when I was a small child, children can be the cruelest people on the planet. And when you have a speech impediment like stuttering, children make fun of you. And my family used to move frequently, so every time I would move to a new neighborhood, the children would make fun of me within a few days. So when we moved to Chicago, I was determined that the children would not find out about my speech impediments. So I would read newspapers and magazines out loud for days and weeks at a time. And when we moved to the new neighborhood, none of the children ever discovered I had that speech impediment. So that's the good news about public speaking. This is a learned skill, and everyone could get better at this skill by practicing.
It's
So that's
amazing.
one of my early struggles in terms of public speaking. And there's good news here. A person like myself who has a speech impediment and eventually becomes the world champion of public speaking, and I make my livelihood as a full-time professional speaker, there's hope for everyone. And so anyone who's listening or watching this Skype broadcast, there's hope for them that they can learn this skill. It's not the domain of just a few privileged people. Everyone can do this.
It's great because a lot of people are believing that it is a born skill.
No, I do not believe that at all. This is not a born skill. It's a learned skill.
Yeah,
And
it's
one of the
great.
ways, and one of the places you can learn how to do this, get better at it, is obviously Toastmasters or any type of. You can get good at any skill as long as you practice, you rehearse, and you put in the work.
And it's amazing because now you help thousands of people uh, to be more powerful and use the power of public speaking.
Yes.
It's great, and I have a lot of questions about that. And my first question, I would love to know, how do you tell your own story? Do you have some advice? I saw something that 4 elements of effective storytelling. Can you
Ah,
can you explain me what is it, and how can I share my own story with your advice?
okay. I call it the 4 H's, and the 4 H's are head, heart, humor, and what I call heavy hitting. Head. What does that mean? Does your speech or your topic make people think? That's element number one. Number two, heart. Does it connect or relate to the audience? Can your audience relate to your message? Humor. Does your presentation make people laugh? And finally, heavy hitting. And I chose the word heavy hitting in English because of alliteration. And that is what I call the KFD. What do you want people to know, feel, or do once you are done? Basically, what's the walk away message? So usually, of those four, head, heart, humor, heavy hitting, the only one which is optional is humor, because all messages don't necessarily lend themselves to humor, and not all presenters are funny. So if you're not funny, you don't have to be. But if you're making a story or if you're giving any type of presentation, be it a business presentation or um, a presentation for fun, ask yourself, does my presentation make people think? Can people relate to the ideas and the concepts? And is there a walk-away message? Is there a KFD? What do I want people to know, feel, or do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's great. Do you start each of your speeches with your own story?
I'm known for telling my own stories, and that's a very good question. Um, Many of my presentations, I do begin, and I have a whole library of my own stories. So in fact, I have something called a story file, and in the story file, I have at least 50 stories that I've created over a decade. But I'll look at that story file and I'll see if it's appropriate for me to tell my own story. Sometimes it's not.
Yes.
So there's different sources of stories. There's your own personal stories.
Yeah.
There's a third party story that is something that we read about in the media or we see on YouTube or Skype or etc. Or there's a story about your audience members. And I usually, whenever I'm speaking or presenting, I try to tell all three. And usually I typically try to begin with one of my stories because I'm the most familiar with my story. But I only tell my story if it makes a point for that specific audience. If my story doesn't fit that audience, I don't tell the story. I tell another story that fits them. But what I always try to do is I always try to tell a story about them. And here's the good news. The story about them, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a story about them. And what I will do is I will, before my presentation, I will interview at least 4 or 5 people in the audience. And I'm looking for stories about them so I can actually incorporate that into my presentation. And that's always very, very effective because now you're making one of their audience members, one of their coworkers, the hero as opposed to yourself.
Great. I would love to have your point of view about something. Sometimes I do speeches for smoker who try to stop. And I never smoke, but I'm known in France with my ability to help people to take actions and stop, take actions to change your life, because I was shy and I had a lot of difficulties to speak and be confident, and I spoke a lot about self-confidence. But when I am with an audience with about smoking, the self-confidence is not in uh, don't fit the. Do you understand what I would like to say you?
I think I know what you mean. And let me answer the question and see if I'm on track. And if I'm not on track, then ask me again. One thing I've discovered about audiences love for us to be vulnerable. They actually like to hear about our failures more so than our successes. And when we talk about our failures, and we're like, for example, being shy or not being so confident, then all of a sudden the audience says, that speaker, that person's like me. And that's what I mean by relating or connecting. That's what I mean by the heart piece. How can you connect with other people with your heart? So when you share your vulnerabilities or your lack of confidence in the audience, they can relate to that. Was that the question? Is that what you're trying to get to?
Yes. My question is exactly that, and I would love to know also. You have 10 different ways to open and close any presentations. So can we speak about that?
Sure. There's several different ways you can open a presentation. We've already talked about story. So that's one way of opening a presentation. You could open up with a startling statistic. That is a statistic that people may not be familiar with. For example, there's a statistic that I open up with sometimes. The first, I'm going to give you 3 different sets of numbers. Okay?
Yeah.
The first number is 44,025. So that's the first number, 4,425. Okay, that's the first number. The second number is 39,250.
Yeah.
So the second number is 39,250. The third number is over 250,000. Over 250,000. So let's go back to the first number. First number was 4,425. Well, that's the number of U.S. servicemen and women who were killed in Iraq since the year 2003. 4,425. Okay. The second number, 39,205. That's the number of people in America who are killed annually in drunk driving accidents. 39,205. In excess of 250,000, that's the number of people who are injured in drunk driving accidents. Now, I don't mean to be crass, nor do I mean to undermine the difficulties faced by soldiers. However, in America, you have a higher probability of being killed or injured by a drunk driver than you do a terrorist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love the fact that you you give three numbers and you come back, and I love that.
Yeah. And you tell them what they mean. So that's a startling statistic. A demonstration. So there's a friend of mine, and he sells petrol pumps. As a matter of fact, he's the number one seller of petrol pumps or gasoline pumps in the world. He just landed a big contract with Walmart. And what he does is he actually brings into the room an actual functional petroleum pump.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't have gasoline in it. Like the actual gasoline pump, it actually has it's a clear plastic tube with lights in it. But it actually functions. You can actually take your credit card, put the credit card in it, and it works. But he lets the customer actually play with the equipment. So it's a live demonstration. So a demonstration is another way of opening things. You can share. You can have a poem. If it's appropriate for the circumstances. There are literally hundreds of ways in which you can open or close a presentation. The key here is what I call presentation variety. That is, like, let's say, for example, you have a presentation and there's 3 points you want to make. The enemy of any speaker is sameness. That is, presenting the information the same. So if I was presenting a presentation, I may begin with a story. Then I may show, like, another way is video, showing video. That's another way you can show things. And I might end with a demonstration, or I might end with a poem. Or you can open up with a question, a rhetorical question. Or audience participation is another way that you can involve audiences. The key, though, is for you to have variety. Every time you change your method of delivery, it re-engages the audience's attention span.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And how do you choose between different ways to open?
Great question. I always ask myself the following question. So I look at my content and I ask myself, what is the best way for me to present this content? Is it a story? Is it video? Is it a demonstration? Is it like these different varieties that we've talked about? And I just use my gut and I test it. So sometimes what I'll do is I will say, okay, let's try this piece of content with a story and see how that works. And if the story is not that effective based on audience reaction, I might try something different. But I always start off with that question: what's the best way for me to present this information?
Great. I would love to know also, according to you, what are the common points of speaking star?
Oh, the speaking star?
Yeah.
Okay, speaking star, that's one of the products on our website. And it's myself and four of the world champions of public speaking. Three other world champions of public speaking, plus a lady by the name of Patricia Fripp. And the Speaking Star product actually has five different keynote presentations. I talk about an idea called mindset shifts, and I present over if you're stuck in in your life, I present a dozen different ways as to how to get unstuck out of your life.
Yeah, can we talk about that?
Sure. For example, one way is like sometimes you're stuck because of the voices in your head.
Yeah.
So say, for example, if you're single, you want to ask someone out for a date. Or if you have a job, you want to ask your boss for a promotion. And sometimes before you even ask that person out for a date, or you ask your boss for a promotion, you talk yourself out of it. You say no before they say no. And and by the way, some of these ideas, they seem like a little silly, but they work. And the first thing, one of the ideas I share it's called thank you for sharing. So say, for example, you want to ask a person out for a date, or you want to ask your boss for a promotion. And then all of a sudden you hear those voices in your head that, no, they'll turn me down. I'll look foolish. I'll look silly. Well, whenever you hear those voices, you say to yourself, thank you for sharing. You say, stop, thank you for sharing. And then you go, you figure out your plan as to how you're going to ask that person out for a date, or how you're going to ask your boss out, how you're going to ask your boss for a raise. You do it anyway, despite the fear.
I would love to know also, do you think we can, I'm sure you know, I know your answer, but do you think we can improve charisma and how we can do that?
Ooh, that's a good question. How can we improve charisma? Well, I think charisma starts in between your ears. It starts in your head. There's a friend of mine. His name is Alan Weiss, and he says the first sale is to yourself. And what that means is you have to believe it before anyone else. I think charisma is an inside job. So if you feel that if you're confident, if you're comfortable, and you feel that you're going to be successful, that's charisma, and that carries over. One of my favorite books is by a guy by the name of Alan Weiss. The book is called Thrive, and this whole book is about your mindset. I recently I got a $50,000 retainer. I don't know how many dollars that is in euros.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of money.
Yes.
And the reason I got that is not so much because of my charisma, but because of my confidence and believing that I'm worth every penny. As a matter of fact, I believe I'm worth even more than that. But it began here. It began between my ears. It began in my head. And once you believe, then that carries over, and people see that. People also see lack of confidence as well. So there's a Henry Ford, who founded the Ford Motor Company, has a quote. He says, "If you believe you can and you believe you can't, you'll be right."
Yes.
So charisma is an inside job. It begins inside of you.
Okay, so if you develop self-confidence, a lot of things will become possible. Mm.
Absolutely, but you also have to keep working at it. You can't store self-confidence, and occasionally, I wish you could. Yeah, I really wish you could. Because if I could store self-confidence, I would. I would have like a whole case of it over here.
A USB key.
I think we've come up. We stumbled across a great idea. But you have to constantly practice it. You have to constantly be working at it.
Yeah.
Because the negativity in your head, it comes back so quickly, and it's such a habit. So you have to practice these things on a regular basis. Another book I absolutely love that helps people with both their confidence and their charisma, especially if they've lost them, is a book. It's called The Tools. Can you see that?
Yeah,
It's
but
called,
the connection is very low, and I don't like the quality of the image on my side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'll just mention the name of the book. It's called The Tools, Tools,
yeah,
and it's by Phil Stutz, Stutz,
yeah.
and Barry Michaels.
Mm,
And the subtitle is Five Tools to Help You Find Courage, Creativity, and Willpower, and inspire you to live life in forward motion. It's a
great.
great book.
Yeah,
It's a great how-to book, and it's a great book for people to, if you've lost your confidence, how to get it back, and how to build your charisma.
it's great. Thank you very much, Ed, and I contact you.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, David.
Bye.
Bye bye.